Hello, I'm Judson. I am the creator of Deep Regrets, and I'm going to be talking to you today a little bit about creating board games. This is a presentation I gave previously for a design team, that I thought would be useful to record and pop on YouTube, especially for budding board game designers that are interested in learning the ins and outs of publishing your own board games. So today I'm going to go through a few things, just a brief intro to myself, how I got started in board game design, how it all came to this, how you even go about designing a game, like the ins and outs of actual board game design. How do you market that thing once you have created it? And then kind of like logistics. A great fun thing that everybody really enjoys and is a necessary part of shipping physical product. And then just kind of some learnings, and we'll talk a little bit about what's next for me. So first up, who am I? This is me in the trailer for Deep Regrets. Hi, I'm Judson. So I spent about 20 years in the advertising industry. I'm originally from the US. I worked at agency side over there, and then I moved over to the UK and worked at Skyscanner as a creative director for a bit. Simultaneously, I was kind of moonlighting as a composer and musician, doing stuff for video games and commercials and the like, most notably Rogue Legacy 1 and 2, and Cartoon Network, things like that. And then also moonlighting on the side as an illustrator as well. I did a bunch of fan art that did really well. This is me. This is an image of me press checking the poster I did for Tune in Fairweather, which is a map of Lordran from Dark Souls. I started making board games in 2018. That was when I started developing my first game. And then I published my first one in 2020, and I became full-time doing this as my career in 2023. So I've been full-time as a board game designer for about a year and a half. I'm also TEDx Games. This is my game company, and it's just me. I am TEDx Games. I work with a bunch of I outsource logistics and things like that to other companies, and I work with a bunch of partners in various countries and manufacturers and what. But TEDx Games is me. So everything you see here is my work. I do the illustration, the design, music, the composing, whatever it is. I have to wear that hat. One caveat that this is being given from the perspective of a self-publisher. Many designers will license their game to other publishers, which is a totally valid approach. It saves a lot of trouble, but sometimes it can mean loss of control and lower profits. So I choose to self-publish, but a lot of this will still apply if you choose to instead pitch your ideas to publishers look to get published. So how did I wind up making board games? Here is me at the tender age of 7 or 8, I forget exactly. I used to make haunted houses in my like front garden and my front yard and entryway for trick-or-treaters when they would come through, and we'd try and scare them when we gave them candy and stuff like that. And I took that love through to a lot of things that I do, and will become relevant again. Just stick with me. So like game design as a discipline is this weird confluence of kind of every skill I've learned in my entire career. So I'm an illustrator. That's a very necessary part of board game design. Ooh, color's a bit harsh there. That says advertising if you can't read it. I worked in advertising. That's required to tell people about your game. Graphic design, obviously useful in explaining how your game works or developing a UX UI that helps players understand how to play the game. Music, filming, and photography, all required for marketing your game, taking photos of it, filming videos of it, composing stuff for trailers, stuff like that. User research is a big part of it. You need to do play testing with various groups of people to understand how people interact with the game and what's working and what's not. UX UI, I mentioned, is part of the graphic design thing to help people understand how the game systems get together. Systems thinking is important because everything kind of chunks together in interesting ways. And I'll come back to systems thinking a little bit later in the presentation. And then there's kind of this fabrication print production thing, which I started my career in print production. So it feels like a natural transition for me to be working in manufacturing. And then like in the center of all this is kind of board game design, but it's not just these skills. These are the ones I already had. There's like this whole world of other things I had to learn that was really, really complicated, like shipping, theming, business development, customer service, international freight. The list goes on, and it gets a bit overwhelming. Luckily, I have kind of like an ADHD personality, and switching hats often is actually very helpful for me. So this kind of feels like a bit of a superpower to be able to wear all these hats. Why I started making the types of games I did is you get this, authors are given the advice, write what you know. And like with board games, theming is kind of the writing. This is a plate that I made when I was about 5 or 6 years old. These are little sea heroes. These are creatures that I made into monsters like that actually live in the sea. You can kind of, there's like an oyster and a crab and a shark and whatever. And I basically made that again as an actual game 30 years later or whatever, 40, 35. Oh God, I'm old. It's much, much later, made this into an actual board game about monsters in the ocean. So I've been obsessed with this kind of idea for a long, long time. Um, and I know spooky stuff well. It all kind of comes from this spooky background. There's me at Zombie Walk in Atlanta. There's my lovely wife Blair helping me apply grease paint to the inside of my thighs. That's when I knew she was a keeper. And then at the bottom, there's me building haunted houses in my front yard. I worked a season at Netherworld in Atlanta, one of the top haunts in the US. So I know and love this world of like creepy and spooky things. So like when I first started developing games, the first thing I started making that I still have not completed is a game called Fright House, which is a game about building and running your own haunted attraction. I'm still, as thematically, I really love this idea. You invite guests in, you try to scare them, right them out without killing them. And if you do kill them, you have to pay for upkeep on them and things like that. It just doesn't work. Like it is on permanent hiatus. I'm still trying to figure out how to make it work. I want to come back to it at some point because I love the concept and it's close to my heart. But that's where I started in board games, making something that was very close to my heart. And I would recommend doing something similar. So how do you do this? Like once you've kind of decided where you want to be in the board game design, how do you make a game? This is the first game I published, Hideous Abomination, which is a much simpler, family-friendly monster builder type thing. You're going to need a lot of Sharpies. That's a simple answer, but for prototyping, you're going to want to draw a lot of stuff. But aside from that, like you want to start with figuring out where the fun is. So like you generally come into game design with a concept in mind, something you want to create. And it's going to start out probably not very fun. The more you kind of test it and play test it and over, you'll go through and discover that bits of it aren't really working or it's not very fun. So like the whole process of designing a game is about figuring out what's fun and amplifying that thing as much as possible. There's a great idea inside your concept somewhere. You just have to dredge it out a bit. One of the big debates in board game design, which any board game design watching this will have a strong opinion on, is theming versus mechanics. People tend to start with one or the other. Theming is the horror fishing game is the theme of Deep Regrets that I made. Monster Builder is the theme of Hideous Abomination. And then the mechanics are the actual things that like the mechanical aspect of it that makes the game work. So like, is it a dice roller? Is it a card passer? Are you laying tiles down? What are the mechanics and how do they tie together? And there's a big debate about which is best to start with. I kind of talked about a concept earlier. I like to start with a concept and develop both simultaneously if possible. I tend to lean towards theming a bit more. This is the first page I ever did of Deep Regrets. I came up with this idea and started thinking about some concepts that go with it. And what you see on this notebook paper is actually pretty close to the final product. So I like to try and develop both simultaneously, which I have an advantage on because I am both the designer and artist and game designer of all the games I create. So I have that kind of control, and some people may have to work with an outside party to do the artwork or the theming and things like that. But I think the best games are considered simultaneously and they coalesce really well. Either way, I really like what you're doing here because you're kind of setting yourself a brief. I've worked in the design world, and I think that constraints are important to creativity. So you've kind of you start with theming, you need to then, like the brief is, develop a mechanic that works well with the theme you've set yourself. And if you do it the other way around, it's, their brief is come up with a theme that works well with the mechanics you've developed. So either way, you're imposing constraints and you're working in creative space, which I really love. There's also a big debate about luck versus skill in games. How much luck should be included? Should there be any luck included? It's like the Eurogamer movement prefers as little luck as possible. They like to make sure that everyone has an absolute equal shake and that strategy is a huge part of the game. But I think luck is important in making games accessible for operating different strategies and creating fun. There's a reason I've used these two images here. On the right there, you've got chess. There is very little luck involved in chess. It is strictly strategy. The pieces always do the same thing. Both players always start with the exact same setup, and it is strictly about strategy. But there's a reason not a lot of people play chess. It's because it's hard to understand the strategy. And if you're good at chess and you're playing someone who's not, you're not going to enjoy that. Like everyone has to be very good at the game in order for all players to enjoy what they're doing, or you have to be at similar skill levels. The more luck you introduce into the game, the more even the playing field becomes. The more people are able to engage with it, even if they don't feel like they fully understand the strategy. And then the game on the left there is Magic the Gathering. That's developed by Richard Garfield, and he has some really cool quotes about luck. You should look up some articles written by him about the use of luck in games. But one of the things he said that I really like is that people who play a game with luck involved, when they win, tend to say, "Ah, I did really great that game," and when they lose, they tend to say bad luck. So it gives people an opportunity to feel like it wasn't their fault that they did win a game. That's one of many, many great quotes he has about it. So once you've kind of come up with whether you're going to start with a theme, how much luck's going to be involved, and you've got a thing you're developing, a concept you've put together, you move into like prototyping. And the earlier you start this process, the better. And the quicker you fail, it's like a fail forward mentality. Fail quick, waste less time, waste less money. This is a Sharpie prototype. This is the first, kind of the second prototype I made for Deep Regrets. And this was a good way to kind of discover how it operated. Without investing a lot of money and time in developing artwork and design and all that kind of stuff. Once you've got your MVP prototype or even a more high fidelity version of it, you got to playtest the hell out of it. This is the user research aspect, right? And there's two types of playtesting. There's normal playtesting, which is where you sit down with your game and teach people to play it, and then you play the game. This is very important because it helps you understand how your game works. Until you have played your game, you won't really understand the ins and outs of it. There's going to be a lot of things that surprise you about the design you've come up with that you did not expect. So playing your game over and over is very important. But once you've gotten it to a certain state, you need to start doing blind playtesting, which is where you have written a rule book and you hand the game with the rule book to people that have never played it before and tell them, learn this game and play it. And you can either sit and observe them, or you can have them give you notes after. But this is the way most people will be playing your game. Most people are not going to have you sitting at the table teaching you how to play. So you need to test out how it works in a blind setting. And you do a lot of them. Like you need to play test the hell out of things to make sure that you're figuring out edge cases. Take on personas. Try different things that try to break the game as much as you possibly can to make sure you're weeding out all of the weird scenarios. As you're doing this, there's going to be a lot of balancing involved. There are a lot more spreadsheets involved in game design than you might have imagined. This is one of the various, you can see all the tabs down at the bottom. This is one of the various spreadsheets I have for Deep Regrets. And it's kind of I use it to keep track of the values of all of my things, where they're going to fall, keep everything in one easy place so that I can refer back to it as a source of truth, basically. But all the cards need to have some sort of balance to them, especially if everyone doesn't have equal access to them, so that everything feels balanced and fair, even if there's luck involved. I mentioned systems thinking earlier, and this is interesting with regards to board game design. So everything is connected, right? Every small tweak that you make can have really far-reaching impacts. The reason I put this illustration here is this is a dining table. When you're making a board game, you need to consider the physical space that it fits into. And I tend to try and design to like a 6x3 or 6x4 standard-sized board game table or dining room table where most people are going to play their games. So will your game fit onto that table? And if it won't, are you targeting a much more advanced crowd that is likely to have a larger table? So as you make tweaks to and adjust your prototype and kind of evolve based on the feedback you're getting from play testing, you have to ask yourself, if I introduce something that's going to make it not fit on a table anymore, is it now going to be too long to be fun? Is the cognitive load going to get too heavy for people and be, more trouble than it's worth? Can you still communicate the rules logically and succinctly? Is the box going to need to be larger? Like you're going to have to expand the size of the box? Is that going to push the shipping cost up into a higher tier? And thus is the game still going to be affordable? And many, many more. So like it's going to have this cascading ripple effect every decision you make, which is I think it's kind of cool, but it can be challenging. Graphic design, obviously a very big part of board game design. It needs to be beautiful, it needs to be clear, and it needs to be accessible. I have a very Dieter Rams approach to design, where he says to use as little design as necessary, or as little design as possible. So when I add things, graphic devices, or like a font or whatever it is to a board game, I kind of ask myself a few things. Like, one, does this design serve both the gameplay and the theme? If it doesn't serve both or one very strongly, it's probably not worth including. Is it colorblind friendly? Are you making sure that your colors are contrasty enough, or that the reds and greens are separated enough that people who do not have the full range of vision for color can identify them clearly? Are the icons clearly defined? Like, have you made them easily identifiable and clear from one another so that people can quickly see what an icon means? Is the text large enough for people with vision impairments to read? I have to wear reading glasses. Is it consistent throughout? Are you being inconsistent in ways that could be frustrating to players? Is it easily localized? Are you setting up your files in a way that people can pick it up and take it into other languages? Hopefully, you will have people approaching you to localize your game. And then the other visual side of things is the illustration. I like to draw in ink. I love physical media, and I kind of hate this whole AI situation. So I love the process of working with physical media on paper and then taking that into the digital space. So I tend to draw in pencil and then outline in monoliner, like pigment liner, and then I scan and I color in Procreate on an iPad. And I want to mention while I'm talking about this, the whole AI thing, I won't weigh in too heavily. I'm not a fan, but I will say from a commercial perspective, you should be aware that there is a resistance to AI use in the art sphere. I sent out some surveys about Deep Regrets and asked people kind of what they were most excited about the game, and 100% of the people mentioned art. The art. They had seen the artwork for it, and that was a key selling point for them, which is amazing. Some of it, like, it was very heartening to me as an artist to hear that as well. They would also mention things like the theme, or that they loved a video game, Dredge, which is this is like inspired by to some degree. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But everybody mentioned the art. Gamers care about art, and they really hate AI. They kind of feel like it's a signal that you're cutting corners with the art, might implicate that you're going to cut corners elsewhere. So be aware that if you were using AI for art, you might send a signal that people wouldn't be a huge fan of. So here's the development of this over time. So kind of putting the line art together, and this eventually became the port board for Deep Regrets. Yep, there's some other examples. There's the great old one himself, Fraud, Hugo, some of the fishermen. Another interesting thing you have to do when you're developing board games is fabricate them in some way or another. You have to put together these prototypes, which you need to either pay a lot of money to have done or learn to do yourself. So get handy with a craft knife or a scalpel, as they call them in the UK, an X-Acto blade. Figure out how to cut and corner punch cards. There's going to be a lot of corner punching. It will make your thumbs sore, but it helps prevent the corners from bending and stuff like that. Figure out how you can make effective looking prototypes that simulate the feel of the game without necessarily spending a lot of money on it. Once you have the game at a better point, then you can start investing in manufacturers' prototypes. And these are expensive. So like this is a manufacturer's prototype that I photographed for Deep Regrets. So it's all printed digitally rather than using offset lithography. So the colors aren't quite accurate, but the components are accurate. So like the paper being used is correct, things like that. So it gives you a good sense of what the game will actually feel like. It's expensive, however. So manufacturing a single unit of Deep Regrets normally costs me around $8 US. Manufacturing one of these prototypes costs around $150 US for perspective. So you want to make as few of these as possible, and send those around to reviewers and stuff like that to check out. Another thing that's interesting about mass manufacturing is that there's some interesting challenges that come into play. And I had never worked in a space where I needed to be quite so considerate of the environment. I don't believe that individual responsibility is a huge part of saving the world, but I think that someone like me who is suddenly manufacturing tens of thousands of things should be considering the ecological impact they have, because it's great. I'm shipping things across the ocean, which consumes fossil fuels and things like that. Like the impact that I have on the environment is much greater than the average human being. So I'm trying to find ways to be considerate of that. And it's more expensive to do that with manufacturing. You can use like FSC certified materials, but it costs more. You can avoid using plastics, but it tends to cost more. But I feel like it's important enough that I find ways to make that work. And if you look at the success of Deep Regrets, you can kind of see that it's possible to be considerate to the environment and still be profitable. And I want more developers to be aware of that. Obviously, one of the least fun parts of any design process, any creative process, is the whole murdering your darlings thing. Things aren't going to work out. Like when you get into playtesting, it's not going to be fun. People are not going to understand the simplest of concepts. You just have to accept it, fix it, or let it die and move on. A lot's get lost. You're going to lose a lot of things along the way here. Entire game mechanics might get killed off. Artwork's going to get bent. For example, what you're looking at there represents about 200 hours of work gone. This was the board for Fright House, and it's all hand drawn again in ink and stitched together and then colored in Procreate, and it's beautiful. I love it. It was a fun process to create, but the game isn't working as is, and I need to kind of start over. So I just bin that artwork entirely. So you need to be willing to let go of things. So that's the how you make a game. How do you now market your game? How do you tell people about it? Because if people don't know about your game, they can't buy it. So this is a critical part. This is me, as my friend Connor there in the fisherman's cap, teaching people to play Deep Regrets at UK Games Expo. I would say the first thing to do is join the community. If you're watching this, you probably found it through the community, so hopefully you've already done that step. But before anything else, you need to kind of ingrain yourself in the board game community. And don't just take from it, contribute. Feedback on people's ideas, talk about your favorite games, like ask people questions. Don't just come in seeking support until you have ingrained yourself in the community. So it's a two-way street. You have to give in order to receive. Once you've kind of learned a bit about the community and built some steps there, you can start building your own for whatever your game is. So like here, for example, I put together a Facebook group for Deep Regrets. And whenever I mentioned the game, I would tag the group and say, if you want to come in and follow the progress, you can join this. And we have about 600 people in this group, which is pretty cool. And those are like the people that were absolutely the most passionate about Deep Regrets. You can do a lot of stuff. So set up a mailing list, really important to do. Try and get as many people in that mailing list as possible. Use MailChimp or whatever it is. Set up a Facebook group like this, or do a Discord channel, whatever platform you like best. Create socials on all of the different things for your company. And then post like crazy. Ask people questions, post development stuff, be transparent, share things, share development insights, just get yourself out there as much as possible. And hopefully that'll help build momentum for your company. Another thing you can do is talk to influencers and reviewers. So I talked about these like manufacturers prototypes. These are important to have produced early so you can send them to people to check out. Because, excuse me, because potential backers want to know that someone else has played the game, right? They don't want to just take your word for it because you have a biased opinion. You are the maker of the game. So it's important that people who are not you have played and talked about your game. And you can, so the cool thing is, it might cost $150 to create one of these prototypes, but you don't have to create that many of them because it's standard practice for reviewers and influencers to forward games on. So when you send it to someone, it's usually with the caveat that, hey, when you're done with this, let me know, and I'll give you address, send it on to them, and I'll reimburse you for whatever the shipping costs are. And that's amazing. And like it's universally accepted, which is awesome. Most of the time, it's great to like, a lot of these people will charge you money, but a lot of these people are doing it for free. So I always give them a final like production copy of the game once it's ready as thanks for their thing. And I think this is an interesting thing. So like, there's no such thing as too small of an influencer either. If someone only has 300 Instagram followers, if one of those followers decides to buy your game, that was profit, right? It costs like £8 to make your game, and someone buys it for £30, and you sent one copy of the game to an influencer, 2 copies of the game, £16. You still made £14 off of that. I'm sorry, I live in the UK. Let's say dollars. You still made $14 off of that. So I don't think there's any such thing as too small of an influencer, and I actually love supporting smaller influencers. Make a digital version of your game. Put it on Tabletop Simulator or Tabletopia. Get it in a place where people can play it before it's printed, because this can happen a lot quicker, because the manufacturing cycle is obviously months long, and it can be 6 months to a year before you could potentially get the game in people's hands. So this allows people to check out the game and allows people to play with friends that aren't also in the room with them. So it's a great way to drum up some interest. Oh, the print and play community. These guys are really cool. These folks love to make their own games. If you're not familiar with the print and play community, it's gamers that instead of buying games like to buy basically the print files for games, print them out and cut them and put them together themselves. So it's like a Lego process almost, where it's the joy of creation almost as much as it is the joy of playing the game. And they are such a passionate crew, and they will follow you to the ends of the earth if you cater to them. Yeah, so I had, this is the print and play sheet I made for Hideous Abomination. I didn't wind up doing one for Deep Regrets because it had a lot of bespoke dice in it that would have been complicated. I talked to the community a little bit about it, and it felt like it was going to be too much of a faff. So didn't go ahead with that. But print and play community is great, and that's a very easy way for you to get the game into people's hands. You got to have a how to play video. If you don't know how to make one of these, or don't have the skills to do so, pay someone to do it. This is very important. Just a rule book isn't going to cut it. Think about the number of times you've gone and watched a how to play video and how much easier it was to understand a game than reading a book. So if you're going to launch on Kickstarter, one of these needs to be done before you do that. Paid advertising. So I come from the advertising industry, and I will not stop singing the praises of paid advertising. Organic community building is slow. You can go strictly organic, but it will take you a much longer time because it's all word of mouth. It's trickling out. It takes time for those roots to grow throughout the community. Paid advertising is fast as long as you have money. It can be expensive, but it allows you to build a community very, very quickly because you can reach a lot of people really easily. So if you are willing to venture a little capital into the development of your game, you can make things move a lot more swiftly. And in order to do that, you need to understand your audiences. So this is the Facebook Business Manager, the Meta Business Manager. If you've never seen it before, you need to know who you're speaking to. Understand who your game appeals to, target that audience as effectively as possible and as precisely as possible. So what you're seeing here is actually the audience that performed the best for me for Deep Regrets. You can see a list of a bunch of different audiences I created there. This is one that I hyper targeted to people that I knew would love Deep Regrets. You can see down there, it's like under the people who match. There's like some early criteria with like they need to be digitally savvy. If they've been to ThinkGeek, TechRadar, Gizmodo, CNET, whatever it is, they have some kind of inclination towards digital savviness, which means they will understand how to use Kickstarter and understand like the benefit of doing so. And then it also has to do these things. So HP Lovecraft, it's an Eldritch game, so it makes sense to target people that are into HP Lovecraft. It's a tabletop game, board game geek. You're getting more, people that are into Kotaku. This one is very important. So Team 17 was probably one of the most important things I targeted. That is the publisher that released Black Salt's video game Dredge. This is a horror fishing game for consoles and PC. Where you go around fishing horrifying things out of the ocean. And it was the key inspiration for me in creating in Deep Regrets. Obviously, I had this like already long-standing love of sea horror and things from the ocean, saw the plate I made earlier. But I wanted to take that kind of idea and bring it to life as a board game while, not being too derivative and bringing its own personality to it. But I knew that anybody who played Dredge is probably going to love my game. And that was very true. So this audience worked incredibly well for me. So know your audience, know what they love, and target them effectively. Make your money go as far as possible. Make a great trailer. You're taking this thing to Kickstarter. You got to really catch people's attention. The easiest method is like an animated render. You can hire people for relatively cheap to do this, where they'll put all the cards into like a digital space and make them fly around in an Unreal Engine or in some cheap 3D software. And that's what most people will do. Put a voiceover, explain the game, have the cards float around, and it works. It's fine. But I take a lot of joy in doing a practical approach to things. I like to do entirely on film. I don't like to do, and I like to use as little CG as possible, or as little, motion graphics. Just do everything practically where I possibly can. This is me directing the trailer for Deep Regrets. You can see the professional tripod I've got there, or sorry, the professional crane shot I've created. I've got a gentleman, Jaden, there helping me with some professional grade lighting. That is a light bulb with a paper wrapped around it. Yeah. So I did this as cheaply as possible. I hired my friends. They didn't get paid. I made props. So this is you can see the fish I bought on Amazon down there, and I bought some acrylic eyes and acrylic teeth. You can buy teeth on Amazon. And I bought paints, and I kind of pieced it together into this ghastly looking fish. I borrowed the camera from a friend that I didn't even own the camera. I borrowed antiques from a local antique shop, which were very kind to give me some old ropes and things like that. The whole thing cost me about 500 pounds. And about half of that was paying for a violinist to record the score that I composed. So let's watch this. And if the recording's not great, you can look up Deep Regrets trailer on YouTube and watch it there instead. But here we go.
Deep Regrets, a strategic horror fishing game about reeling disturbing things out of the briny deep. Grab your worms, secure your lifeboat, question your sanity, and push out to sea. Take on interesting rolls. Roll interesting dice. If the tide's not in your favour, hope for a lifeline. Or head back to port to gather your wits. Ho, and you're gonna need your wits, with over 100 unique fish haunting this sea, each more unsettling than the last. Survey shadows, consult your angler's guide, and rely on your instincts to decide where you drop your sinker. Once you've got your fish on the line, the real fight begins. Use rods and reels, bait, hell, eat some things you might regret. Whatever helps land that whopper. But watch out, some have a nasty sting, some are tricky to catch, and some whisper the unknowable secrets of the deep into your unwitting ears. So either land the catch or go home with a pitiful dink. Once you've exhausted your resources, haul your creel back to port to mount for massive points multipliers or sell them to buy new equipment and dice. Then strap your waders back on and set sail once again. Alas, the sea is a harsh mistress. You're going to see some unsettling things. You're going to commit some unspeakable acts. And you're going to regret it. The heavier your regrets become, the deeper you'll slip into madness. Your priorities change and new opportunities emerge. But push too far and you could lose your grip, sacrificing the things you care about most. So find comfort in your friends. Gather a crew of up to 5 tolerable mates for a miserable week at sea. Or go it alone as an intrepid ichthyologist on an epic expedition to survey and catalogue every fish in the ocean over a campaign of dozens of games. Just know that being married to the sea is a toxic relationship. Deep Regrets, an unfortunate fishing game.
So yeah, the advice I got when showing that to people was shorten the intro. And it's great advice I didn't take because I believed in the story I was telling there. And like it felt fun enough that it captivated people. But generally, yes, you would not do something that long. You would get to the punch quicker. People's attention spans are very short. But you can see what I did there. So there's like a thematic intro, and then the second half explains the actual game. You can do just the second half, and that's fine so long as you're doing it with gusto. If you look at that trailer, a lot of those shots aren't even in focus. You know, it's very novice made, but like it was the heart behind it that people really loved. Like it just as long as you care about what you're doing, people will come with you on it. So let's talk about Kickstarter. So you've made your video, you've got it live, you got your Kickstarter page ready to go. It's just as terrifying as you imagine. There's a lot of work that goes into like, putting a Kickstarter together, and it can be really, really daunting to run. And as it's going, there's this like Tetris effect where you start checking in so regularly that watching those numbers tick up invade your thoughts and dreams. It's all you think about. It can be really, especially your first one, it can be trying on the soul. So why is Kickstarter so widely used? And when I say Kickstarter, I mean all crowdfunding platforms. Why is it so popular to use crowdfunding platforms? It's a much higher profit margin. If I sell one, because you're working direct to consumer, right? So if I sell one game to someone on Kickstarter, I might make a $15 profit. If I was to sell it to a distributor and they sold it to a consumer, I might make a $3 profit. So it's literally like 10x higher profit margin, which is great. It minimizes your risk. So there's obviously some pretty high costs involved with creating board games. You have to pay to manufacture them if you're not working with a publisher. And that tends to be an amount of money people don't just have lying around. If it costs you $50,000 to manufacture your game, that shuts most people down at the gate. And Kickstarter allows people to get a hold of those funds ahead of time and to gauge interest. So that X number of people are definitely interested in your game, which is great. It gives you an idea of how many you should be manufacturing. It's amazing. Full control of the process, start to finish. You don't have to worry about what a publisher thinks of your game. So you get some really raw, pure ideas that come through on Kickstarter. Again, retention of your IP. You're not licensing your IP out to someone, so you can continue to control it forever, which is great. You can avoid having to take out business loans to pay for things, or avoid working with investors, which again might cause a loss of control. And kind of one of the things that should not be undermined here is the hype and momentum behind a Kickstarter. It's an event. It's like going to a big concert. It's fun for people to follow along with. There is a sense of inertia behind it that people really, really rally behind. So it definitely performs better than just running ads and selling games directly. I've tried both. Like the ads that I ran for Deep Regrets after the Kickstarter had concluded were like maybe an eighth as effective as the ones I ran while it was going. Obviously, there's an insane amount of work and copy and writing and stuff that goes into this. So just be aware that there will be a lot of stuff. It needs to look very polished because this is the forward face of your board game, basically. This is the first contact a lot of people are going to have with it, and you need to put your best foot forward. I've had very different experiences. I've done 3 Kickstarters so far. I did 2 for Hideous Abomination, 1 for first edition and second edition, and then I did Deep Regrets. And you can see the hockey stick curve that I had here. First one made about £3,000. I'm based in the UK. Second one made about £65,000, and then Deep Regrets made about £650,000, which is just literally 10x. I will say that every one of them so far followed the exact same pattern, where it's, you got this big initial spike, day 1, day 2, a lot of people flock in, and then a big finish where a lot of people decide to back at the very end, and then just like absolutely nothing in the middle here. There's this drought of despair that just persists the entire middle of your Kickstarter. And this is why you'll see people asking you to shorten the length of your Kickstarter. It's because not much is going to happen in those days anyway, unless you've got really good advertising. And generally speaking, that in blocks is all the organic stuff. That's the work you've done ahead of time. That's that community you've drummed up. That's the interest you've built by sharing your prototypes with influencers or whatever it is. They tend to flock in on day 1. A lot of people there's often a rush to be the first to back or get back early, especially if you have like an early bird incentive to save a few bucks or whatever it is. And at the end, people who are on the fence will decide whether they want to convert or not in the last few days. And then everything in the middle is advertising. That's the drumbeat of that paid marketing that you're doing to bring people in. Another important thing about Kickstarters, and you'll see this, is to set your funding goal where you're confident that you'll hit it on the first day. So I'm going to draw back the curtain on that a little bit. You see all these things are like funded in 15 minutes. That's because they did that very intentionally and knew they were going to do that. So Deep Regrets funded in 13 minutes, which was awesome by design. Not because of it's a bit arbitrary. I set a funding goal that I knew I would hit quickly based on the audience I had already gathered, so that it built momentum. So the benefit of doing this, and the reason you people see so many people doing this, is that it builds confidence. People go, oh, okay, this is already funded. Other people are backing it. It builds momentum. It gets other people wanting to get involved with a thing that's already gathering steam as it rolls downhill. And it gets attention. And if you're lucky, maybe it gets the attention of Kickstarter to get this project we love status. No idea how that's given out. Maybe algorithm, maybe the right person sees it, whatever it is. If you get it, it means Kickstarter starts promoting your thing more actively and more people are likely to see it. And that means more organic traffic to help fill that drought in the middle. So the advertising that we're talking about is most important when the Kickstarter is live because of the momentum I discussed earlier. And the more you can spend and keep a consistent ROAS, the better. If you've not heard the phrase ROAS, that's return on ad spend. So if I spend $1 and I make $2 back, that's a 2x return on ad spend. Luckily, I worked with BackerKit, and they handled all the programming and ad spend for free for me, which took a lot of weight off my plate. And it meant I didn't have to come to the table with a massive advertising budget, because that can be really expensive too. And as long as they were hitting that, so I said like a 2.5x return on ad spend, ROAS. As long as it was continuing to make at least 2.5x back, they continued to spend and continued to scale up, and they spent a lot. They ran all kinds of stuff. So there was like static ads. They ran the entire trailer that you just watched, and that performed well. That long ass thing performed really, really well. It was bonkers. Just resonated with people on some level. You can do live ads as well. You can do banner ads as well. I wouldn't do them anywhere other than Board Game Geek. I don't do banners anywhere other than that. I think it would be a waste of money anywhere else, but on Board Game Geek, it's very effective. We talked about targeting your audience effectively. Board Game Geek is where your target audience lives in most cases, unless you're doing something really, really mass market friendly or like family friendly. Those kind of folks might not be aware of Board Game Geek, but most board gamers will. And then, once you've got everything, all your ducks in a row, steel yourself, because it's going to be hard. Even if it goes well, there's a lot of customer service. So this is like, 13,950 people backed my project. That's a lot of people to do customer service for as one person. There's a lot of insecurity involved in it as well. You're not sure if the things are going to fund. Like my first two Kickstarters, my first one funded on the final day, and it was only through the support of the amazing community of board gamers that it got there. It's making suggestions on how to improve the campaign and things like that. So there's so much fear that goes behind it. Even once you've funded, there's insecurity. Is it going to fund enough that it really becomes profitable for me? And you're going to feel way, way too exposed. People don't think about this, but what you're like, this, created by Judson Cowan, my name sits right above this number on the internet. If you Google my name, this is like the second thing you'll see: 637,077 pounds. Last updated on October 18th. So, this is recent. So my name is attached to this exact amount of money. Like, imagine if everyone knew exactly what salary you made last year. There's a lot of overhead. I'm going to be very transparent about how much I get to take home from that. But it's very strange having people know, including your close friends and family, know your business so intimately. So be aware of that. But it can be fun. I say all this. I'm just trying to set your expectations accordingly. But it can be a lot of fun. So yes, speaking of fun, let's talk about logistics. Look at these guys. Look how much fun they're having. Oh yeah, it's great. So step one with the logistics aspect is you need a budget. You need to understand how much your game costs to make and get to where you live or to where the backers are. And this needs to be done before you launch because you need to know how much to charge. So you got to talk to manufacturers. You got to get estimates that give you a clear indication of what all the components cost and how much the cost goes down if you have a higher order quantity and things like that. And you use that to put together this budget that gives you an idea of what you need to get funded, what you need to produce your minimum order quantity, which is the minimum number of units you can produce with a manufacturer. And once you have all that, you can use that to determine what your funding goals should be and how much you want to charge per game and things like that. So I mentioned MOQ, that's minimum order quantity. CPU is cost per unit. That's a really important thing to understand. And generally, your MSRP, your suggested retail price, will be about 5 times your cost per unit. And then DDU is delivery, duties unpaid. So you need to keep in mind that there is freight shipments to wherever your games go. And you need to include that as part of the cost of the game. That's your landed cost to manufacture and get it via freight to where it needs to be shipped. Speaking of shipping, it's an absolute nightmare. And you're not going to know if you got it right until months later. This is what you're looking at here is an estimate list that Fulfill Right provided for me. They're my US fulfillment partner. They send you like what the cost will be to ship each thing to each country, basically. And this is just multiple tabs in a big ass spreadsheet and what the costs are associated with that. And these are all estimated based on the current perceptions of what the size of the box will be and how heavy it's going to be, which might change over time. So your shipping costs might change from when you charge people for shipping to when you actually wind up doing them. So if you see these like estimated shipping charges on Kickstarters, that's why it's always estimated, because it's so unclear what the costs are going to be until much closer, because shipping costs can change. That's why it's usually charged closer. And shipping costs are generally passed directly on to the buyer. Like, you shouldn't be paying for those unless you want to subsidize those somewhat. You can, knock a few pounds off to make it more affordable for people. But generally, you want to pass those costs directly on to the consumer. But seriously, so like using an online platform like Kickstarter means you have to meet the needs of the entire world. Unless you just say, I'm only going to sell this in the UK. But generally, you're trying to, reach as many people as possible. You're trying to generate like as much momentum and funds as possible. And shipping to the entire world is really not easy. Just figuring out shipping, I would say, is probably as complex as almost everything else put together. And again, you're not going to know if you got it right until you actually pay to ship all these things months or years later when they actually go out. So pro tip, pay someone else to do it. So my first Kickstarter, I handled all of the UK fulfillment myself from my flat. I boxed it all up. I put on Scooby-Doo. We wrapped them all up. I put stickers on them. We had the Royal Mail come collect them. The second one, I worked with fulfillment partners, but I managed that myself. I had the things sent to them. I dealt with the customs and importing and all that stuff. But now I have hired a company called Naylor Games who do a thing called back office, and they are just dealing with it for me. And I can't overstate how beneficial that is. I'm paying them a lot to do it, but I think the time I'm saving by paying them means I can get my next game out quicker. So if you can afford to pay someone else to do it, I would highly recommend that. I've done it myself. Obviously, it's not fun. There's, you have to understand freights and customs and fulfillment and warehouses and compliance and VAT and now tariffs. It's likely to be a minefield you're just going to blow yourself up in. So try and get help in from people who actually know what they're doing here. So we're going to get really transparent right now. How much of these untold riches does my business get to keep? Because I am now a limited company, which means I can't just take all that money. It goes into the business and I pay myself dividends out. So we're going to get real transparent here. So going into it, I had about 6,500 pounds worth of sunk costs. That includes paying for prototypes, to film the trailer, going to conferences, things like that. Everything that I had to spend up front. And then on top of actually it's higher than that because I had about 5,000 pounds worth of ad spend as well, where I was gathering a mailing list ahead of time. So let's say roughly 11,000 pounds going into it is what I had to spend to bring the Deep Regrets Kickstarter specifically to market. It's in funding. I got to take home about 590,000 of that was paid out to me. The rest was like almost 650K. Kickstarter takes a percentage and a credit card processing fee, which amounts to about 9 to 10%. So they paid me 590,000 pounds. And then I generated an additional 240,000 pounds in backer kit, collecting add-on costs and shipping costs and collecting VAT and taxes. My live ad spend, this is crazy. So I told you earlier, the backer kits, they floated this ad spend for me, and they just kept spending as long as it was performing well. It performed incredibly well. Just something about this game really resonated with people. The art style was very desirable. The theming really grabbed people, and it just did incredibly well. So they just kept spending, and they spent about 100. This includes my Board Game Geek ads as well, but about 130,000 pounds. I've worked with those kind of budgets previously in ad industry, but for clients, never as an individual. I can't tell you how terrifying it is to have that kind of number attached to an ad spend that I, as an individual, am paying for. Obviously I pay it after the fact from the funds that Kickstarter gives me, but still, whew, scary. Anyway, okay. Manufacturing is going to cost, it's underway right now. It's going to cost about 160,000 total. Shipping is going to cost about 230,000. Of most of that comes out of the backer kit funding that you saw there a second ago, and that includes VAT and taxes. I am paying about 25,000 to the logistics company that's looking after all the shipping and stuff for me. I will owe a little bit to the German partner that joined me on the Kickstarter for the copies that they sold in German. And then let's say there's just about 25K of various other costs required in getting this thing to market. And then I also made a donation to the Marine Conservation Society because it's a game about the ocean, and I'm trying to find ways to reduce my ecological footprint. So pre-tax income of about 213,000 pounds. And that gets taxed in. So it's still a really good chunk of change, but it's not, nearly $1 million, which is what it looks like if you're just looking at the Kickstarter. So a good idea of what you actually get to take away from a Kickstarter. It's somewhere between a third and a half, depending on what your ad costs look like. I'm hoping that future campaigns, I won't have as high of an ad spend because I already generated an audience that I hope will come with me into future campaigns, but we'll see. So what have I learned? Last step here. My favorite learning about this, and I already kind of knew this, the board game community is surprisingly non-toxic. I think that, and the reason for this is I think that games require empathy. You're sitting at a table in most cases with someone playing, or you're playing online with someone on a Zoom call or whatever, and it's either people that you know or it's people you've just met, and you have to learn about them. In order to compete against someone, you need to be empathetic because you need to think like them, to understand their strategy. So you have to be empathetic to play games, which I think is great. I think that engenders a really positive culture, which is you don't get compared to the video game industry, which is far more toxic. But it's not completely immune. There's still this kind of alpha gamer mentality that you get in the video game industry as well, mostly men that take a lot of pride in their collection or have a very elitist attitude or very competitive, things like that. They can still be they'll be the most dedicated fans, but they can be very vocal, and that can be challenging to deal with from a customer service perspective. Yeah, I mentioned this earlier. Speaking of customer service, 14,000 people is a lot of people to deal with. I put a visualization of that on the last day of my Kickstarter. It was about the number of people in the auditorium at the Paris Olympics intro. It's a stadium worth of people. And people, all of them are going to assume, based on the polish and the care that you've put into the creation of this thing, they're going to assume you're a megacorp, and they're always going to come in hot. So when they have a problem, they're going to come at you like, why is this, X, Y, Z problem? Why is this cost so much? Why is that thing? Like, I can't get this to work. They're going to come in assuming you're going to, like a bot, basically. And 99% of the time, you can turn that around. You can convert that person into a lifelong customer just by being a fucking human being. It seems like such an obvious thing, but you'd be amazed. I mean, you've probably experienced how many people are bad at this. Like, just find it. I look at every customer service issue as an opportunity to give people hope in the human race again. Try and take the same approach. And maybe that comes from my time spent in retail and food service, where I think everyone should have to work some degree of their life. The unfortunate truth, you have to spend money to make money. You can get really, really lucky, catch someone's attention and do something completely organically, but most of the time you're going to be more successful if you have some capital to invest in the thing. And I hate that. I really hate that. It locks out so many talented people, and it tends to favor people that look like me, like really, really, I'm aware of my privilege, and I try to find ways to use that privilege to help others go to the ladder. So I like, if you are a board game developer from a marginalized community or someone like less represented in the board game community, hit me up. I'm happy to help out. I love to look at prototypes. I love to answer questions. I'm here to help. You have to be okay with failure. I mentioned my first Kickstarter almost didn't make it over the line, funded 2 hours before closing. I would call both of my first 2 Kickstarters kind of fail forward experiences. They both funded, but they made very little profit. And I would have approached them differently knowing what I know now. And you have to be resilient as well. Like any creative industry, you're putting a lot of yourself into if you're doing it right. Like if you're an artist or a musician or whatever, a lot of yourself goes into a thing, even if you work in advertising. Like, and it can be really frustrating to have negative feedback given about your thing. You've got to grow a thick skin. You've got to learn how to accept that feedback without taking it personally and apply it. Feedback and criticism is critical to making your game great. So just briefly, what's next? For me, as TEDx Games, and apparently counterfeiters is one of the things. This is interesting. I discovered that there is a Chinese counterfeit being made of Deep Regrets already up for pre-order, and there's not much you can do about it. Like, I think they stole potentially screen grabs of the game off of Tabletopia or somewhere like that, and it'll be a horrible quality thing. I think more than anything, it's going to be a customer service issue because people are going to assume it's a final quality game and email me. I've talked to the folks at Wonderbow who made Kelp, had similar issues, and they said this is the case. People were like, my game is missing components, and they were like, you need to report that. That's a counterfeit. Sorry. And then aside from that, what am I making? Too many things. So localizations, Chinese, German, Ukrainian, Polish, all underway currently. I'm speaking to a couple of other languages. I'm hoping to get it into as many markets as possible. I'm doing a small thing. So this is a big spoiler here, but I'm working with Button Shy, who I've always been a huge fan of. They do entirely wallet-sized games. They come in that little plastic envelope you see there. And they're exactly 18 cards with exactly the same size rule book. It's a very interesting design challenge to work within that. And I always wanted to do it, so I got in touch with them. Or they got in touch with me because they were, really loved Deep Regrets and thought it was cool. And I was like, I would love to make a game for you. And they said, let's do this. So we're going to be making, soon to be announced, a game. Deep Remorse is a working title. We'll see what it's actually called. But it's a very simplified travel version of Deep Regrets. Yep, Deep Regrets expansion. Even Deeper Regrets is in progress. This is all kind of work in progress stuff, but I've already got the entire game, the gameplay designed. I'm just kind of working through the yard now and doing some play testing. Personal Demons is a game about summoning. It's like a group therapy ritual where you're summoning and facing and conquering your personal demons. Very excited about that one. It's coming along very well. Maybe I'll come back to Fright House at some point, and then just like I have this idea of doing a game about a blob. I don't know what that's the concept. It's a blob game, so I guess that's starting with the theme. But I'm obsessed with the 1988 remake of The Blob. You should watch it if you've never seen it. That is me. I originally gave this presentation on Halloween, so happy Halloween, my favorite holiday of the year. Yeah, you can reach me at judson@tedxgames.com. Comment on the video, whatever you want. I'm happy to help out. And again, thank you for taking the time to check it out.